Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive, into Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Noah Harari.
Yes.
It's a really fascinating book.
Absolutely.
We're going to try to get to the, kind of pick out some of the most interesting parts and see what we can learn from them.
There's a lot of meat on that bone to pick from.
It's a lot to chew on, for sure.
Yeah.
So I guess we should start right at the beginning.
Yeah, let's do it.
Harari talks about this period about 70,000 years ago called the cognitive revolution.
Yeah.
What do you think that was all about?
So the cognitive revolution, he argues, really comes down to this ability that sapiens have that really no other species that we know of has, which is the ability to believe in things that don't actually physically exist in the world.
So, like, you mean things that we just kind of made up?
Yeah, he calls them imagined realities.
Okay.
Things like gods, nations, money, corporations.
Right. Like, I get that you need laws and rules to have a functioning society, but it's kind of wild to think about those things being made up and then shaping the entire history of
Well, that's exactly it.
the world.
That is it. It's the power of ideas. And he contrasts this with what he calls the dual reality of chimpanzees. So, chimpanzees obviously live in a physical reality, but they also have a social reality within their troop.
Right.
And it's very real for them. Who's the alpha? Who are they going to mate with?
Right, but like we took it to a whole other level.
We took that and went bananas with it.
That's a good way to put it.
We've got this whole other layer of imagined reality on top of that.
So I guess a good example of this, I remember Harari talking about the Sinjar burial site.
Yes.
I think it was in Russia.
Yeah, that's right. It's a fascinating site, and it dates back 30,000 years.
And what was so special about this?
So what's special about it is it's not just, a simple grave. Yeah. It's this elaborate burial. And they found a man buried with, I think, over 3,000 ivory beads.
Really?
A hat decorated with fox teeth. And then there's another grave with 2 children who are buried head to head, also adorned with thousands of beads and these intricate ivory objects.
Yeah, I remember when I read that, I was like, wow, 3,000 beads. How long would that even take someone?
Well, the book says that it took about 45 minutes to make each bead.
Yeah.
So you're talking about an enormous investment of time.
It's an incredible amount of time.
Yeah. And the thing is, it speaks to their belief system.
Right.
Why would they invest so much in these burials? They believed in something bigger than just the physical world.
Yeah, it makes you realize that these early humans weren't that different from us.
Yeah.
Like they had, abstract thoughts. They wanted to figure things out.
Absolutely. This capacity for abstract thought, this desire to find meaning and purpose in the world.
It's almost like these shared stories and myths.
These imagined realities.
Yeah.
Allowed them to cooperate on a larger scale and do things that no other species has ever been able to do.
So I guess we'll fast forward a bit.
Yeah, tens of thousands of years.
And talk about the agricultural revolution. Yeah.
Which is, when humans started to farm.
Exactly. Around 12,000 years ago.
Right. And, this might seem like the next logical step, from hunter-gatherers to farmers.
Right.
But Harari says this was not necessarily a good thing for everyone.
Well, he calls it the luxury trap.
Right.
Right. Think about how much time we spend today working and, maintaining our lifestyles, even with all of our modern conveniences. Are we really that much better off than those hunter-gatherer ancestors who had more free time?
You've got a point there.
Right.
I think about how much time we spend working, even with all the stuff that's supposed to make things easier.
All the time-saving devices.
Right.
Email was supposed to free up all this time for us.
Exactly.
And it's just not the case.
So I guess the agricultural revolution wasn't just about farming. It was kind of a whole societal shift.
Oh, it led to so many other developments, settled life, the rise of cities, specialization of labor.
And eventually money.
And eventually money.
Harari mentions barley money in Sumer. Yeah, isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
About 3000 BC.
Was it literally barley?
It was literally barley.
Wow.
Barley grains were used as a standardized unit of value.
Huh.
So you could trade your, shoes for some barley and then use that barley to buy a goat.
Right.
Because everybody agreed that this barley had a particular value.
It's kind of amazing how something so simple could have such a big impact on how we interact with each other.
It revolutionized human interactions.
Yeah.
And what's so interesting is this happened around the same time and place as the invention of writing.
So both of these are kind of coming out of this need to organize and manage these increasingly complex societies.
Absolutely. As societies grew larger and more interconnected, you need ways to keep track of things.
Yeah.
You need to manage resources. You need to record transactions.
I wonder, like, what would have happened if we never figured those things out?
Right.
Would we have been able to have these big empires and civilizations that came later on?
It's a good question. Yeah, it really makes you think, doesn't it? And speaking of these larger civilizations and empires,
Yeah.
that's kind of where we're going next in this journey through Sapiens.
Mm-hmm.
Harari really points out that for most of human history, we're talking, past 2,000 years or so, most humans have lived under the rule of some kind of empire.
Yeah, it's kind of like taking these complex societies we were just talking about and just like supersizing them,
Right.
Instead of it just being a bunch of villages or city-states connected, it's now this massive territory with tons of different kinds of people, all under the control of one power.
Exactly. And it brings us to this really interesting tension that he highlights, which is the tension between empires and nationalism.
Okay.
Because empires throughout history have often absorbed or even just, wiped out the unique cultures of the people they conquered. And very few conquered people throughout history have actually regained their independence.
Yeah, I never really thought about that before, but you think about what the world would be like today if all these different cultures hadn't been absorbed or wiped out.
Right.
Would there be even more diversity in the world than there is now? It's pretty crazy to think about.
It really is. And I think a great example of this that he uses is the Roman Empire.
Mm-hmm.
When the Western Roman Empire collapsed, most of the people they had conquered, they didn't reemerge as independent nations. Their cultures were either absorbed into the Roman way of life or they just kind of disappeared.
That's wild. I mean, that's a pretty stark example of how these empires can really reshape and sometimes even erase cultural identities.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder about the world today. Like, you've got nationalism, which seems like it's kind of fading in some ways, but then you've got this rise of globalization.
Right.
Could we be moving towards some kind of like global empire in the future?
Yeah, that's a question that Harari brings up, and it really makes you think about what the future holds. What forces are going to shape human societies in the coming centuries? Is it going to be economics, technology, or something we haven't even thought of yet?
It's definitely a lot to think about.
It is.
So we've talked about empires as one of these major forces shaping human history, but we can't forget about religion, can we?
We can't. It's played an absolutely massive role.
So how does Harari define religion?
Well, he defines it as a system of human norms and values founded on a belief in a superhuman order.
Okay, so break that down for me a little bit. What does that actually mean, like, in everyday life?
Well, essentially it means that religion provides us with a framework for understanding the world around us and our place in it. It tackles those big questions like where did the universe come from? What happens after we die? What's the meaning of life? And because those answers are rooted in a belief in something bigger than ourselves, something supernatural or divine, those answers become incredibly powerful in shaping our values and our actions.
So it's not just about providing meaning, but it's also about authority, right? Like, it can be used to justify social hierarchies or give power to rulers.
Absolutely. Throughout history, religions have been used to support everything from, social structures to moral codes, but also, unfortunately, things like war and oppression.
Right.
But it's important to remember that not all religions are created equal. We often think about these universalizing religions like Christianity or Islam, which actively seek to convert people to their beliefs.
Right. Those religions that have a missionary zeal, they want to spread their message to everyone.
Exactly. But many ancient religions were much more local and exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
They were focused on a specific community and their relationship with their immediate surroundings.
So it sounds like religion, just like empires, can be a bit of a double-edged sword.
Very much so.
It can bring people together under shared beliefs, but it can also lead to conflict and violence.
Precisely. Look at the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in France, where thousands of Protestants were killed by Catholics, all because of these theological disagreements about the nature of God's love.
It's scary to think how these abstract ideas about religion can have such real and brutal consequences.
Yeah, it's a reminder that this capacity for both creation and destruction, it's something that's been with us throughout our journey as a species. And this leads us to the next big turning point that Harari explores, which is the scientific revolution,
Okay.
which began at about 500 years ago. And he argues that this wasn't so much a revolution of new discoveries, but a revolution in our way of thinking.
He calls it a revolution of ignorance.
Exactly.
Which sounds a little weird at first, right? Because when you think about science, you think about knowledge, not ignorance.
Exactly, and that's what makes this concept so fascinating. He's arguing that the biggest breakthrough of the scientific revolution wasn't uncovering some new fact, but rather it was the willingness to admit how much we don't know.
So instead of just assuming that we had all the answers, we started to embrace the unknown and ask new questions.
Exactly. It was a radical shift from pre-modern thought, where, the prevailing belief was often that all the essential knowledge was already contained in sacred texts or had been passed down through tradition.
So if admitting we don't know everything is the first step, what were the other key elements of this new scientific way of thinking?
Well, there were two other pillars. The first being a reliance on observation and mathematics to test theories and build knowledge. It wasn't enough to just speculate. You had to actually go out and gather evidence, analyze it, and use logic to arrive at conclusions. And the second pillar was a focus on using this knowledge to gain new powers, particularly through technology.
That second part is really crucial because science isn't just about understanding the world, it's also about changing it, right? Shaping it to meet our needs and desires.
Absolutely. And to illustrate this point, he introduces us to this group called the Scottish Ministers' Widows Fund back in the 1740s. These ministers, they wanted to create a fund to support their families after their death.
Sounds like a good goal.
It was a noble goal. But they faced this very practical problem. How much money should each minister contribute to make sure that there would be enough funds for all the widows and orphans?
Yeah, that's a tough question.
It is. And to solve this problem, they turned to statistics and probability.
Interesting.
They applied scientific thinking to a real-world social problem.
So instead of just relying on faith or good intentions, they used data and analysis to come up with a workable solution.
Precisely. And the amazing thing is it worked.
It did.
The fund was successful, and it actually served as a model for later insurance schemes. And this really highlights the practical power of scientific thinking.
Yeah, so the scientific revolution wasn't just about these abstract theories or, academics sitting in ivory towers. It actually had a tangible impact on people's lives and showed that you could use knowledge to improve the world and even gain some control over your own fate.
And this brings us to the modern world, where the fruits of the scientific revolution are all around us.
It's amazing, isn't it, to think how far we've come since those early days of the scientific revolution.
Yeah, I mean, we're living longer, healthier lives. We have technology that, our ancestors couldn't even dream of.
We've unlocked so many of the secrets of the universe, and we've used that knowledge to create some pretty incredible things.
But it feels like all this power comes with, some pretty big risks, too.
It does.
We're facing these massive challenges like climate change, ecological collapse, and the potential for these new and terrifying kinds of conflicts.
It really is a paradox. We've achieved so much, but at the same time, we're putting our own future in jeopardy in ways that no one could have ever imagined before.
Yeah, Harari talks about some pretty unsettling possibilities. He mentions the Gilgamesh Project,
right?
This quest for immortality, which is something that humans have always been fascinated by.
Of course, we've been searching for the fountain of youth forever. But it's different now. It actually feels attainable,
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what a world without death would even be like.
It does. Would it be a utopia like some people imagine? Or would it create a whole new set of problems and dilemmas?
Yeah, it's hard to even wrap your mind around it.
It is.
And then there's genetic engineering.
Right.
We're getting close to being able to actually alter our own genes, which could lead to some amazing medical breakthroughs.
Absolutely.
But it also brings up all these ethical questions.
Of course.
What happens if we create a world where people are biologically unequal?
Right, where the wealthy can enhance themselves and their children genetically, and the poor are left behind.
Exactly. It could make all the inequalities in our world even worse.
It's a real concern, and it feels like we're living in a science fiction novel.
I know.
Except we're the ones writing the story as we go.
It's kind of scary.
It is, but as Harari points out, we're not just passive observers of history. We're actively shaping it with every choice we make.
It's a lot of pressure,
It is, but it also means that we have the power to create a better future if we choose to.
That's a good point.
It is, and I think that understanding our past, recognizing these patterns that have shaped us, can help us navigate the challenges that lie ahead.
One of the things that really stuck with me from the book was his discussion about happiness.
Oh, yeah.
You'd think that with all the progress we've made, all the material wealth and the technology, that we'd be living in this golden age of contentment.
You would think.
But it doesn't really seem like that's the case, does it?
It's a common assumption, but it turns out that happiness is a lot more complicated than that.
So how do we even measure happiness scientifically?
Well, Harari talks about this idea of subjective well-being.
Okay.
which is essentially a way to assess how people experience and evaluate their own lives.
Yeah.
It goes beyond just asking someone, are you happy?
Yeah.
And looks at things like, life satisfaction,
Right.
positive emotions, and feelings of meaning and purpose.
So it's more about your inner experience than your external circumstances.
Exactly. And one of the most surprising findings from this research is that external factors like wealth and political freedom, they don't actually have that big of an impact on happiness.
Really? So if you win the lottery, your happiness levels aren't going to shoot through the roof?
Not necessarily. It might for a short time, but it's not going to have a lasting impact.
So what is it then? What actually determines our happiness?
Well, Harari argues that a lot of it comes down to our internal biochemistry, which has been shaped by millions of years of evolution.
So even if we achieve all our goals and become super successful, it might not actually make us that much happier in the long run.
That's the suggestion, and it really forces us to confront what we're really striving for in life. If material possessions and achievements don't necessarily lead to lasting happiness, then what does?
This deep dive has been incredible. We've covered so much ground from, the dawn of humanity to the complexities of the modern world.
It's been quite a journey, and I think it all comes back to this fundamental truth about ourselves as a species. We are incredibly complex creatures. We've accomplished some extraordinary things, but we've also made a lot of mistakes. And as we stand here at this crossroads in history, I think it's more important than ever to understand who we are, where we've come from, and the forces that have shaped us.
So knowing what we know now, about human history, about the power of ideas, and our capacity for both, greatness and destruction, what kind of future do you think we should be striving for, and what role do you think each of us can play in shaping that future?
That's a question each of us needs to ask ourselves and grapple with. I think the most important thing we can do is to stay curious, to keep learning to be open to new ideas, and to never stop questioning our assumptions about the world. The more we understand ourselves and the forces that have shaped us, the better equipped we'll be to face whatever challenges come our way and to create a future that we can all be proud of.